Well, it is Testimony Tuesday time once again. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for following. And we once again encourage you to like it and to share it. That's how we get this out. Today, most of you probably recognize this guy, Ron Irick. And Ron has been a part of this community for all of his life and been part of this church. Part of the West Liberty Church most of his life. And he's here today, and he's going to share something quite unique about the history of the Bell Fountain Church. So I came here, and one of the first things we did in 1999 is we celebrated our centennial.
Yes, that's right.
And so that was, so this church has a huge history, 100 years plus. Of just being in existence here in Logan County.
Yes.
And Ron's going, hey, let me just tell you something. If you need to know history, call Ron Irick. Don't go to the library. Don't Google, just call Ron Irick, because this guy knows history and he knows it well. Ron, I was thinking this morning, knowing that we're going to do this today, and I was thinking the first time I met Ron Irick, it was in October of 1998, and you come in. It was the day I tried out here for being the senior pastor. You come in and you said, "Hey, run up to the hospital with me. There's someone sick." Do you remember who that was? I remember who that was.
No, I don't.
This is okay.
You tell me who that was.
Me and you went and saw Vivian Henry at Mary Rutan Hospital,
okay.
and so that I remember that's the first time I met and seen Ron. Hey, Ron, man, again, you know in history, so and I appreciate so much you being with us today. I appreciate so much you taking the time and so share with us, because probably only a few people that are going to hear this and follow this has a clue about the long, rich history of the Bell Fountain First Church of God. So, share that with us.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay. The history of the Bell Fountain First Church of God is deeply entwined in the history of the West Liberty First Church of God.
Okay.
But the history of the West Liberty First Church of God is deeply entwined in the history of the Mennonite churches in West Liberty.
Okay.
Now, in Anderson today, Dr. Merle Strigge, Barry Callen, Walter Froschie would have you believe that the Church of God movement came out of the Wesleyan Methodists. But in our case, and much of this part of Ohio, the Churches of God came out of Mennonite situations.
Is that right?
So this is this is just particular to our location.
Yeah.
But here's how it happened. In the late 1880s, when the Church of God movement was beginning in northern Indiana and southern Michigan and across West Virginia, there was some discord among the younger Mennonite families in Logan County and northern Champaign County. And they had three issues. And some of these issues are still out there today.
Okay.
The first issue was that the people wanted their church services in English, not German.
Oh, yeah.
Now, what if we all came to church on Sunday morning and you only preached in German?
It would be a mess, wouldn't it?
You'd be in,
I'd be in trouble.
So they wanted English, not German. They wanted 4-part harmony music with a piano.
Oh, okay.
Now, we have wonderful music today,
yeah.
and we've got way beyond 4-part harmony. And, drums add a lot to a church service.
Sure.
Guitars make it more homey.
Yeah.
But these people didn't even have a piano then. They wanted a piano, and they wanted to sing 4-part harmony.
Yeah.
And that comes out of the Church of God tradition also.
Sure.
The evangelistic singing teams.
Yeah.
And if the Church of God hymnal, it's all written in 4-part harmony. So that's part of our worship.
Yeah.
The third thing was they wanted Sunday afternoon off so they could have family time and spend time with their children. These people worked all week. They worked all day Saturday, and they were expected to come to church early Sunday morning and stay till late Sunday night and sit and listen to boring old gray-haired guys preaching German.
Oh, that would be tough.
They wanted family time in the afternoon.
Oh.
So those three things were an issue.
Yeah.
Now, the old gray heads that ran the church wouldn't listen to them.
No, they wasn't gonna budge.
They brought in a younger Mennonite bishop from northern Indiana, and he baptized several families into a new group of the Mennonite church. And out of that They're mostly young families. Out of that group, one young family, a farmer named Levi Mast, was on his way to, I think, Indianapolis to buy horses at a horse sale. He got on a train in Urbana, and on his seat was a copy of the Gospel Trumpet magazine.
Okay.
He picked up the Gospel Trumpet and he started reading, and the more he read, the more excited he got.
Wow.
When he got home, they passed this magazine around to all these younger couples. They all sit and read this Gospel Trumpet magazine. They decided to contact the Church of God offices in Moundsville, West Virginia, and ask for an evangelistic team to come. So in 1895, a group came from Moundsville, Virginia, and they held a tent revival. See, we're always in tent revival.
Yeah, that's true.
They held a tent revival at the corner of Ludlow Road and Road 30. There's a little cemetery there yet today. There used to be a little abandoned Methodist church called Mount Pisgah. And across the road, they set up their tent and they had a big revival. That was the beginning of two things. Part of those people became the Church of God in West Liberty. The other half became Bethel Mennonite Church. Because they didn't want German, they wanted music, and they wanted time for their children. And the Church of God doctrine just fit what they wanted. And that was the birth of the West Liberty Church of God.
Yeah.
A couple years later, 1899, they had revivals there at Ohio Caverns, at what's called Smith Cross Road on the other side of Mad River. A revival was held at the north end of Ludlow Road at Eastern Avenue. Now, at the end of Ludlow Road at Eastern Avenue was an empty field, and farmers would come into town, park their buggies there, pasture their horses, and walk the rest of the way into town to do their business. And people camped in that field all the time. So it was the Bell Fountain campground. So they came there, set up a tent, held a big revival, and that was the birth of the Bell Fountain Church of God.
Is that? Wow.
And even when I was a kid, many members of the church still lived in that neighborhood. So they held cottage prayer meetings in people's homes. And the first home was John Warren's family. And John Warren was a cousin of Barney Warren. But he was the father-in-law of Charlie Wagner, if you remember Charlie Wagner.
I remember him talking about
There's just a deep, ancestry of this church.
Yeah.
So they went from cottage prayer meetings. They rented a storefront downtown where City Sweets is now. So if you go into City Sweets to get ice cream or a donut, that's where the Church of God used to meet, in that building.
Is that? Wow.
And if you look outside on that building, on the cornerstone, it says Patterson. William Patterson built and owned that building. Well, he got to listening to the Church of God message, and he became a member of the Church of God. Eventually, he was preaching in the Church of God.
Yeah.
So from there into the 1900s, the church was growing. They were doing cottage prayer meetings, meeting downtown. They then rented a storefront on West Columbus Avenue. And then a couple named Charles and Minnie Parker, and their family's still here in the church, donated a piece of land way up on West Williams Street. The church sold that piece of land and bought a lot on Evansville Street. And there they built their little chapel in 1907. That was the first structure the church built. That building is still there. It's the back portion of the old brick church down on Chillicothe in Evansville. So now they had a building. They were growing. A couple from West Liberty, Gideon and Fanny Detweiler, were members of the Gospel Trumpet teams, and they came to Bell Fountain and helped get this church started. And probably the first full-time pastor was William Shell. Now, Walter Froschie, the professor from Anderson, he comes over here. You and I met with him one day. He's searching for the history of William Shell. Well, Shell was D.S. Warner's second-in-line associate. When Warner died, Shell took over as the head of the Gospel Trumpet. And then a couple years later, he left there and came to Bell Fountain as pastor. And he was pastor here for a couple years. He also pastored the West Liberty Church. So again, this connection continues between these two churches.
You was talking about Ron Wagner.
Charlie Wagner.
Now, that, Parker.
Charles and Minnie Parker.
Okay, now, was that Helen Parker's father and mother-in-law?
That was Lester Parker's grandparents. And all the Shields family,
they
were all grandchildren of that couple. So that couple's family still is permeated through the church.
Well, we pastored, they were much part of that when I was here.
When Cindy and I first came back to Bell Fountain from West Liberty, I sat in church one morning, I looked around, this person is that person's brother or sister, and they married that person's brother or sister, and their cousin's sitting over here, but they're married to the brother of this guy that sits over here. This church is a family.
Yes.
Very much connected, but yet they're always open to newer people.
Yeah.
Newer people, yes.
Yeah.
Always. H.M. Riggle preached a revival here one time.
Okay.
And down on Evansville Street. Simon Yoder from West Liberty often preached here. So a lot of, but until Brother Shell came along, they didn't have a particular full-time pastor.
Yeah.
E.E. Caldwell was here as a pastor at one time.
Yeah.
And in the 1930s, in the Depression, the church called Sister Sarah Massey.
Okay.
I've seen pictures of Sarah Massey. I never knew her. But the legend was she could make you confess the sins you hadn't done yet. Now, you mentioned Loretta Jameson in church Sunday morning. Loretta, Mary Jane, all those ladies were teenage girls when Sister Massey was here.
Oh, okay.
And she kept them in line.
Oh, that's funny.
But she could make you confess the sins you hadn't done.
Committed. So she had that reputation, huh? How about that?
Yeah. Then after Sister Massey, Richard Lee's grandfather, Elroy Lee, became the pastor here.
Okay.
And he was pastor for a couple years.
Wow.
Then during World War II, Fred Pinion was pastor.
Yeah.
And towards the end of the war, the church was growing, families were increasing, the baby boom was starting. And down on Evansville, Chillicothe, they started a massive building project. And they added the big brick church to the front of the old little chapel. And the little chapel set this way. The big church went into it this way.
Yeah.
And they added the sanctuary, the platform, the baptistry, an office, the tower, the secretary's office, the balcony. All this added to that little chapel and had a very nice big brick church.
Yeah.
But all the guys coming home from World War II put the labor into building that building.
Okay.
They built that church.
Wow.
So we think of Herb Henry, Paul Little,
Yeah.
those guys built that church.
Yeah. Of course, Paul is June Little's husband, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And June was Charlie Wagner's sister. And
yeah.
it all goes back and all ties together.
Yeah. Wow, that's so neat. So neat.
And then Brother Von Chesterman followed Fred Pinion. And they bought a vacant lot next to the church on Chillicothe Street and built a very, very nice brick ranch house. It was an all-electric home in the late 1950s, something new and different. It was an award-winning home. There was a plaque in the living room of this house, a big bronze plaque of what a wonderful house this was. And that was the parsonage.
That was a parsonage?
Yes.
Yeah. Isn't that neat?
Francis Cummings was the first pastor to live in the parsonage. He was followed by J.L. Hatchell. J.L. Hatchell's associate and youth pastor was Oral Withrow.
Yeah, okay.
Now, there's a big name in the Church of God. He was youth pastor here.
Yeah.
When Oral Withrow left, they hired this new kid out of college named Tom Smith to be the youth pastor.
Yeah.
So that's when Tom first came to Bell Fountain.
Yeah.
That 1957, now they say the whole world changed in 1957. That's when Sputnik went up and the Russians became our enemies. Well, Bell Fountain built 3 new school buildings. Well, the Church of God, in their wisdom, bought one of those old school buildings. So now at the end of Chillicothe Street, we had the big brick church, the brick parsonage, and the old brick schoolhouse. The church owned the whole neighborhood and ministered to the whole neighborhood. And that building became known as, it was officially called the Christian Education Building. Everybody called it the CE Building. Everybody used that building. Sunday school, Bible school, youth meetings, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, ball games in the yard, big picnics. It was just used by the whole neighborhood and the whole church.
Community.
And everybody revolved around the old CE building. And kids walked from the CE building over to the church. Sunday school here, walked to the church, rain, snow, whatever. You walked from the CE building to the church.
Which wasn't a huge distance.
It was half a block.
Just the
length of the parsonage.
Right.
And Bible school, the whole neighborhood showed up. You'd have 400 kids lined up out in the street between the two buildings, lined up, holding their flags, ready to march into this Bible school, singing their songs.
Yeah.
It was the whole neighborhood.
Yeah.
And much of the church lived in that neighborhood, too.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember I was about 12 years old. The first time I ever really sat up and listened in church.
Mm-hmm.
And Myron McDonald was the pastor.
Mm-hmm. Now, this was on Chillicothe
Chillicothe
Evans. Okay.
Myron was preaching, and I sat up and listened because I heard this phrase, this is not the neighborhood church. This is not the community church. This is the Church of God Reformation movement. And I thought, what's this man talking about? We believe in salvation, sanctification, and the filling of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
I sat up and listened for the first time in church.
Wow.
That was Malcolm McDonald.
Mm.
Malcolm's father was Myron McDonald.
Yeah.
Now, this is a whole different story. Myron McDonald was a Methodist preacher. He got filled with the Holy Spirit, and he started preaching sanctification at the Rum Creek Methodist Church.
Yeah.
Well, the trustees at the Rum Creek Methodist Church didn't like the message of salvation. They didn't like sanctification. They didn't like the Holy Spirit. They threw him out.
Wow.
They kicked him out as pastor.
Yeah.
He went down the road, and Sister Longbreak had a vacant barn, and they started the Open Door Church in Sister Longbreak's barn, and it became a powerful church on the west side of Logan County.
Yeah.
The Open Door Church of God and the Bell Fountain Church of God and the Open Door Church of God had huge fellowship together. They shared picnics together. They had family times together. They did Saturday night activities together. It was a wonderful blend between these two churches. And many of the people in the church today were kids when their parents went to the old Open Door Church of God.
Yeah.
It was a
wow.
Yeah.
Ron, our time, man, I
got halfway through.
I know.
That's
I can't.
halfway.
But you said something that just kind of resonated with me, and if it's okay with you, and this is we haven't planned this, but if it's okay with you, I'd like for us, Cindy, do we have anybody scheduled for next week? That's on the schedule. You know what? If it's okay, I'd like for us to pick up and because what you said resonated with me, and that was this: these young people came to Christ, and you said the old gray heads wouldn't move, wouldn't budge. Of course, look at here, huh?
Hello.
Look at here, hello.
Hello.
And so, but you said these young people came to Christ. Ron, let's pick up there the next time and talk about how youth has influenced reform and brought revival in our history.
Okay.
And that gives you a little bit of time to kind of research that, because something is kind of stirring within me saying, hey, I don't know how much I'm going to change to bring revival and reform. I'm an old gray head, me and you are. But boy, man, if we could see what God is up to.
And I stirred myself with the memories of that building, that schoolhouse.
Yeah.
The forethought that the trustees of this church had to buy an old schoolhouse and use it for youth activities. And what an outcome it had.
Young people.
Yes.
Wow. Man, our time has gotten away from us, but Ron, if Jesus don't come and we don't go be with him, one or the other, let's pick this up and let's talk about that just a little bit, and we'll just kind of dialogue,
Sure.
So, hey, thank you.
Oh, I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for being here, and we'll continue this, and God bless you.
And we didn't run down any rabbit trails.
We did not run down no rabbit trails. If we had, we'd be here 30, 45
we'd be here
minutes.
3 hours.
We'd be here 3 hours. Yeah. God bless you. Be sure to like this and be sure to share this. Thank you.